Hello, my name is Donovan Osio, and I'm the General Manager of the TDA Perks program. I'd like to welcome you today to this installment of the virtual Successful New Office Symposium. Today's interview is going to be with Drew Etheridge. He's with Xite Commercial Realty. Drew's a Vice President at Xite Realty, and he's been with them since 2015. Xite Realty provides a wide range of services for TDA members, including commercial real estate brokerage, as well as project management services for building construction, as well as interior tenant finish shops. Drew, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to hearing what a TDA member needs from a real estate perspective when they're going to start or purchase a dental practice. We're also curious to see if you've noticed any changes in these needs for a new practice during the pandemic.
Thank you, Donovan. Thanks for having me. A quick background on myself and Xite. We are obviously a dental healthcare real estate company. We focus solely on helping tenants who are going into spaces or buyers of real estate as well. We've been around since February of 2013, seem like much simpler times than now, but it is our focus is to take a very data-driven approach to the commercial real estate process and really helping doctors go from not knowing a thing to walking them through the entire lease process. When we first sit down with somebody, a lot of times they're not ready. They are kind of thinking about doing it or just kind of want to learn more, and that's perfectly fine by us. Once we get the ball rolling and the doctor says, hey, I'm ready to go, normally it's about a 12 to 18 month process. And one of your questions was, has the pandemic affected anything on our end? And it certainly has. And one of those things is timeline. We normally would see that 12 to 18 month window. Obviously, it remains to be seen as some things are kind of unclear with COVID, but we are anticipating that projects are going to take a little bit longer, mainly from a standpoint of landlords not necessarily wanting to do new developments maybe as quickly as they typically do. So I think you'll see some developers holding some projects for a little bit while they kind of monitor this situation. Obviously, everyone took a little bit of a hit, but especially some of those developers who they bought land and they built these buildings with the anticipation of being able to hit certain rental rates, and their lenders are expecting the same thing. And so I think what you'll see is some of them just holding on to their property until it's a little bit better of a time for them to lease spaces. As far as permit and construction standpoint, for the doctors who are doing practices, we haven't seen any hiccups on our end. The way that some of the contractors have said it is, while permitting maybe the office, they don't have as many people working it, and you would anticipate that to be slowed down. They're not getting the same number of applications in the door of people who are, in need of a permit. And so it's kind of stayed plateaued and stayed the same with that. So those are some things that we've seen as far as timeline with COVID that have been affected. But the main thing that's changed is it's really turned into more of a tenant's market than it ever has. The last time you saw a market like this was closer to the 2008, 2009 timeframe. It doesn't mean that landlords are just going to give you a ton off in rent and just give you a real great deal with that. But what it does mean is they're trying to find ways to incentivize tenants to still do deals. The luxury of what we working with dentists is we are still a very strong tenant for a lot of these landlords. You're going to see them avoiding deals with more of the mom and pop, restaurants and nail salons and things like that who have really taken a hit through COVID. And we remain and have remained a strong tenant for them. Obviously, some pains for all of our doctors and whatnot throughout, but most of the landlords have helped with giving some deferred payments or just waiving rent and things like that. It has affected some of how we negotiate in terms of when we have a lease in hand, there are things that we're trying to make sure that we are accounting for. Obviously, COVID was unprecedented. I'm in Houston, as you mentioned, and we dealt with Harvey and multiple other hurricanes, and we know how to plan for that in the lease, and we know the language we need to put to make sure that if something were to happen, there is a roadmap and a game plan of how to get back up and running and what is going to happen to the lease depending on that time frame. With this, since it was kind of unseen, and if you talk to people with business interruption insurance and things like that, they weren't covered. And so it's got us renegotiating things. It's got insurance companies looking at their plans. But landlords are still a little skeptical of being super forgiving of any pandemic language, but we're getting some protections in there. We're getting some things like abated rent, more tenant improvement allowance, just almost a complete open window to get your space designed, the permit and the build out where you're not going to be paying anything. So typically landlords would be real stingy on some of that stuff, and right now they're forgiving, and they're being pretty generous with concessions on that. As far as here I am blanking out. As far as other services that Xite offers, so we handle on the real estate side, we handle demographics, we handle site selection, negotiating to getting doctors from A to Z through the lease, and then there's not a ton we can do on the real estate side beyond that. We want to be your advocate. We want to be there for you through the life of your lease. But ideally, you're not having to reach out to us because there's not issues. So there's not necessarily an ongoing service that we can provide. We are just there if you need us. If you need us to contact the landlord, if there is a hiccup like this, we went out and tried to get in front of it very early in March. Wrote a letter. We attached, Governor Abbott's letter saying that we were required to shut down for a certain length of time, and we were trying to be the first ones to hit the landlords for rent deferment. So we came back through to all of our clients, reached out and said, hey, here's what we're doing. If you want us to reach out on your behalf, we're happy to do so. But normally we hope something like this doesn't happen and we're not having to be there for you. But one service that we offer beyond the lease is our project management and development service, which is helping doctors once you have your lease in hand or you have purchased a piece of land and you now own that. We're helping you get that from either an empty shell space or a raw piece of land to opening your doors for business. It is, as some have described it, basically like a wedding planner type service where you could go plan your own wedding and do it on your own, and that's perfectly fine. But if you want to focus on being a doctor, practicing dentistry, and you don't have the time to handle all these things, and there's so many different little critical disciplines in there that we're having to cover. But what we're trying to do with that is on the front end, really make sure that everything that is supposed to be a part of the space when the landlord delivers it to us, that we have an understanding of that and that your work is bid based on that. What you see a lot of people do, a lot of contractors do, is skip over some little details and then come back later and say, oh, well, we need to do a change order because we didn't know that the building was going to be this or this, didn't know the power was going to be over here. So it's an extra $5,000. And every so often, a couple $1,000s here and there starts to add up real fast. And so we're trying to change the way that the market is handled with that. At first, we got some pushback from some contractors because one of the quotes was, why are you messing this up for us? This isn't how business is done. And that's what we wanted to do, is disrupt that business. And it's a headache for us. And we know it's a headache for our clients when they're taken advantage of like that. And so the project management service has really been nice to protect them on the front end and then be there to hold their hand throughout the process, be their one point of contact, be the person juggling the balls and planning the wedding and getting them there to where they can open their doors without, I mean, it's still going to be some headaches, but with a lot less headaches and a lot less stress. That is a fee-based service, and we're happy to look at each project individually and figure out what that's going to be. For our TDA perks people, we do have some incentives there, but that is a fee-based service. Whereas on the real estate side, our fee is paid by the landlord once a transaction's done. So that kind of answers some of that for you, Donovan?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Drew. I think the only other area that I had a couple questions on was regarding how y'all work with a client, with a TDA member, whenever they're going through their lease negotiation process, and what are some of the things that people should be thinking about when they start a practice, if they want to sell down the road, if they want to build out a practice, how those things factor into your lease negotiations, even though it may be 5-10 years down the road.
Yeah, great question. So, things that we're doing or negotiating. So we have everybody uses a letter of intent when they start negotiating. Ours is about 6 pages long. It's very detailed, and we're strategic with that. We want to present any red flags about the deal before we're too far down the road. We always recommend that people get a real estate attorney involved at some point, when either right before we get the lease or right after we get the lease, as putting preventative maintenance on their lease. We're hoping that we can avoid things, issues and problems, but as we've seen with COVID, things come up, and a lot of the lease is kind of planning for the unknown. With dental, doctors do the exact same thing. You can spend a little bit of money to do something to prevent a big problem from happening down the road, or you can let that problem grow by not paying attention to it now, and then big issue comes up in 10 years. So with the actual lease, that's what we're trying to do. Obviously we're going to negotiate on things like, your rent, your tenant improvement allowance, which is money the landlord will give you to help build out your space. Simple things like signage and parking and things like that. But we're also trying to make sure that we're getting in front of things like sublease and assignment language. So, for example, you ask about, selling your practice down the road. A lot of people will, when we first talk with them, they will ask us about, how long of a term they should do and what that looks like. And a lot of people think, well, if I just do a shorter term, maybe that's less scary for me. And, if it doesn't work out, I can get out of it. Well, the reality is there's a very low likelihood of the doctor failing. And so we can get a better deal if we stretch it over a longer term. But one of the things that's real important for us is our renewal options. So on a 5-year lease or a 7-year lease, you can typically only get one 5-year renewal option. The issue becomes when you are, 7 years into this thing, if you only have a couple years left and they don't have to give you another option to renew at that point, you're going to have a really hard time selling the practice. Basically, a buyer is going to need at least 5 years left of term to get a loan, unless they're coming in with cash, which most buyers are not. They're going to need at least 5 years or an option of 5 years left on the lease. So if we can get a 10-year deal with 2 5-year options, it's very likely you're going to be in that practice for 10 plus years anyway. But at that point, you at least have protection on the back end to be able to sell it. Landlords once they have you as a captive tenant where they don't have to give you renewal options, they're either going to not be willing to negotiate a longer renewal option for you, or they're going to hit you pretty hard on what rent's going to be, and they kind of dictate it and call your bluff of if you're going to stay or if you're going to go down the road, spend a couple $100,000 to build out a new practice. It's likely you're going to try to find a way to stay and not go through the hassle of moving and paying all the money. So you kind of fold and give in, and you end up paying a higher rental rate than maybe you should. So we like to get on the front end of that. And it sounds crazy to be negotiating a deal, 10, 15, 20 years in advance. But the reality of it is we can do that, and we can set these renewal options in a way that they're unilateral. So the doctor is the only one that decides if they're going to stay or not. And if you don't want to exercise that option, then we can go back and renegotiate the terms at that point. But without a renewal option in there, then that's when we get kind of stuck. We have no leverage. But it's really important on back to the sublease and assignment. That is our exit strategy. That's our way of getting out of this lease primarily. And so if we can, set the language to say we can sell our practice, we can be free and clear of this lease, and here's what that roadmap looks like, then that's what we're trying to do. And I got into talking. I forgot what your other question even was, Donovan.
Actually, Drew, that was a great explanation. That's really what I was looking into as to how you help the members whenever they're negotiating their leases and making sure that they're able to get out of the lease or able to sell the practice. So I think that was very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this portion of our interview. Drew, thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, folks, please give Drew a call. You can reach Xite Realty at 214-306-4555. And remember that you can reach the TDA Perks program at 512-443-3675. Thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.